Hello and welcome to Frank Fridays. My name is Karline Moeller and I am the founder of Art Frankly. I'd like to introduce you to my collaborator, Ellie Hayworth of Hayworth Communications Consultancy. Ellie is committed to promoting intrepid ideas in both art and design, and she has grown her business to command a full scope of client services, including public relations, business strategy, speaking engagements, strategic partnerships, you name it, Ellie can help you. And today we are chatting with Amanda Schmitt, who is a New York-based curator. Amanda focuses on video, sound, performance, and time-based media with a core interest in memory technologies. Amanda has curated over 60 exhibitions, video screenings, and performance series since 2006. Currently, Amanda is the director of Kaufman Repetto, a contemporary art gallery with locations here in New York and in Milan. Ellie, I'll let you get the interview started.
Amazing. Thank you, Karlina and Amanda. I'm super excited to be chatting with you today.
Thanks for having me. So happy to be here.
Amanda, let's just kick it right off. I would love to hear a little bit more about you. Just tell us about your journey to art.
It's always such a good question. I always start with an anecdote of a story that I had when I was 18 years old. So I'm from Wisconsin, from kind of a semi-rural town outside of Madison, Wisconsin. And I was not raised around any sort of semblance of contemporary art. My knowledge of art really went to the extent of arts and crafts. But at a certain point in my teenage years, I got involved in different sorts of what we would call alternative subcultures, music, poetry, reading, and got into art and ended up going to school at UW-Madison, where I studied art. And in the first month of my time there, I was assigned to go and visit a Dan Flavin retrospective at the MCA Chicago. And I had never heard of Dan Flavin before. I didn't have any context. And I remember showing up and seeing the exhibition and being so incredibly confounded by what I saw. Like frustrated, annoyed, fascinated, in love, curious, angry. Like I had all the emotions. And I was really charged by it. And the assignment was to go home and write about it. So that was my first experience writing about art. And I absolutely fell in love with it. The door opened, and I had a very nourishing teacher, Amy Chaluka, who at the time told me, great, like go for it, like keep writing. And she really helped me understand that I didn't have to be interested in making art to be part of art. So I made a regular habit of going to see exhibitions, picking up art magazines, and eventually watching digital art online and writing about it as often as I could. And through writing about it, I was able to understand it more. So writing led to curating, and curating led me to New York City. And jump forward 15 years, here I am with you here today.
I love that. That's amazing. Well, first of all, it's amazing that Dan Flavin was your entree to the contemporary art world. And I also appreciate, I think so many people we talk to, you know, art remains, especially contemporary art, remains a very kind of opaque and insular market. And so to kind of relay that initial experience you had, and then certainly you are quite a part of the art swirl now, you know, I think it's interesting just to see that the trajectory is very human in a lot of ways. So that's a very refreshing anecdote to kind of kick off our conversation today.
Yeah. And Dan Flavin remains, you know, one of my absolute favorite artists. He's one of my true norths.
He was a catalyst for you.
Yes.
That's great. So Amanda, you in, you know, prior professional experience, in addition to being a curator and a writer, you held positions with the Entitled Art Fair, and you pioneered a lot of kind of media projects and programs with the Entitled Art Fair. Can you just unpack a little bit of your work with Untitled and why it was that you focused your attention on launching specifically radio, podcast, and film programs under the Entitled Art Fair?
Yeah. So I started working with Untitled in 2015, and it was a very exciting time for the fair because it was only the third, I think it was the third year, third edition that I came on board. And I had actually done Untitled the very first year as an exhibitor. So I was quite familiar with the fair and with the organizers. And I knew that Untitled really wanted to do something different within sort of the fair sphere. And as an exhibitor, so I was working at galleries at the time, I was already starting to feel fair fatigue back in 2013, 2014, feeling like fairs were becoming too crowded, too chaotic, too crazy, too, unsettling, not a pleasant environment to be in. And I thought that my sort of ethos approaching fair programming, I was the director of programming and development, was rather than adding more things to try to take things away, to try to subtract from the experience. So rather than doing, these more, I think a lot of fairs are known for their special projects where there are, things that are built outside, more monumental sculptures. I wanted to do something that was a little bit more ephemeral. So I started focusing first and foremost on sound art. And by working with sound, of course, we're not taking away anything, but we're taking away a lot of physical material and creating space to sort of act and behave in a different way within a fair space. So we started a program called Untitled Radio, which was sort of a marathon radio session that took place at the fair. It took different iterations because we always partnered with artists to conceptualize what it looked like at the fair. But it, in certain periods, it was a lounge. In certain periods, it was a bar. In certain times, it was even sort of like a tree house that floated up above the fair. And the idea was that we could invite people who were at the fair to sort of take a repose from walking around or sort of being bombarded by, visual stimuli, and to focus on something a little bit more inwards, which I think is something that sound art, in whatever form it might take, can help encourage. And what was even more important to me with Untitled Radio was to sort of provide an antidote to fair FOMO, because there's fair fatigue, which is, people who are traveling everywhere, but there's also so many people are in our industry that don't get to travel to fairs. You have gallery assistants, artist liaisons, art handlers, artist assistants. Not everybody has, a budget or a position where they're also shipping every member of their staff to the fair. And there were so many times where I was left back in New York thinking about what was happening at fairs, feeling like I wanted to take part of it. So the radio broadcast was broadcast over a live web stream. So wherever you were in the world at any time of day, if we were broadcasting, you could tune into the web stream and sort of take part. And in certain cases, we actually had artists that called in or would sort of Skype in to participate. So we had poetry readings or musical performances or interviews by artists that also maybe couldn't travel for the fair. In certain cases, it was more practical, but in other cases, it was because of visa restrictions. So that also took on a political dimension. So that's just the radio portion. So we also did performances, and then the radio eventually turned into a podcast and a film and a video series. But knowing that we have limited time, I think the radio program was really the first project, and that was sort of the launch pad for how I approached programming at Untitled.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that. Also, I think considering squarely where we're sitting today, you preempted a lot of the needs that I think were certainly challenges we faced last year. And I anticipate also lessons that will carry with us moving forward. And it's how do you kind of create an experience that can be extrapolated from just the physical and can actually be disseminated to audiences, globally, especially those who aren't able to travel at certain moments. So I really appreciate hearing that you had this kind of premonition, and we're looking to create a more kind of lifestyle approach to the fair, as early as 2015.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm so energized and excited by all of the innovative ways in which so many different platforms and businesses and individuals have really embraced, alternative and online or phone-based formats over the last year. But it did feel kind of ironic or uncanny to me, because I feel like I've been working in this mode for 15 years. In fact, the reason I started working with video art early on was because I was in a small town in Madison, Wisconsin, and so interested in knowing what was happening in the world and in art, but unable to go out there and see most of it. You know, even my trip to Chicago was a big trip for me at that time. It was a 2-hour drive, but video art was something that you could access on YouTube. It was something you could share DVDs, you could mail USB sticks. So it was something that I feel like I could experience with the artist without actually being there physically.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And, you know, Amanda, this leads me to kind of my next question. And, you know, certainly you have kind of a scholarly and a curatorial interest in video art, sound art, time-based media. I'm curious now, in your role as a gallery director, does that still influence kind of your practice, if you will, or your purview? And just how are you kind of keeping that interest alive?
Yeah. So I work at Kaufman Repetto Gallery. I'm a director here, and we represent 28 artists, primarily female artists. It's a feminist gallery. We work with an amazing group of artists who work, ironically, who work in a lot of different media. So we have artists that do performance, sculpture, installation-based art, video, activist practice, wall drawings, wall paintings. It runs the gamut. Ironically, we represent very few painters. I guess it's not ironic. We represent very few painters, but what's ironic is that the first show that I'm curating at Kaufman Repetto is a painting show.
I love it.
So, you know, a lot of our artists do work with sound. I have yet to curate, you know, anything that, you know, focuses specifically on sound or video here. But I think, you know, one thing we did was with our online viewing rooms this year is we tried to create an experience that was more than just JPEGs on a screen, something that was a little bit more in depth, and also to embrace, you know, digital Zooms and talks and recorded transcripts. In addition to Kaufman Repetto, this year, I also curated a video exhibition for a platform called Ortvi, which is a new organization that it focuses on video streaming by video artists. And it, in a nutshell, you could sort of describe it as a Netflix for video art. But what also makes it quite unique is that the artists who contribute will receive proceeds or dividends for their work being streamed. So I curated an independent exhibition for them this year. Ortv.art.
That is very, very cool. We'll definitely be sure that they get tagged in some capacity when we go live with this IGTV.
Great.
Amanda, so last year clearly was a very challenging year for all the arts infrastructure, but, you know, galleries specifically for a short period of time were not able to exhibit work. I'm curious, I mean, you've alluded to some of the different kind of strategies you guys put into place, but I'm curious if you can just kind of unpack some of the challenges and how you guys pivoted to address them last year. And also just if any specific artist needs were particularly interesting or, you know, worth kind of diving into today.
Trying to think. I have to say Kaufman Repetto, we moved a little bit slower than most, you know, which I think there's also some value to that. You know, when the pandemic hit, there were some galleries that had their online viewing rooms up by like the next Tuesday. And I think we felt a lot of pressure to jump in. You know, I think everybody was feeling the pressure. What are we going to do when the galleries are closed? How are people going to see the work? How, you know, everyone was sort of into action mode right at the beginning. And
reaction mode.
Reaction, action, or hibernation. I think everyone reacted differently. You know, some people decided to sort of go offline for a little bit, take some time to think about it. You know, other people were personally, physically affected by the pandemic and couldn't keep up. So there was something about those first couple of weeks that were really kind of, I mean, of course it was scary. It was scary for all of us, but also very surreal to see how things were changing. One thing that I remember most clearly is a consultant, a curator, and an art advisor named Sherry Pascarella started just sort of catalyzed a group of women in the field to get together on Zoom every week just to talk about what are we going to do, and to put women at the forefront of this conversation and to speak to each other, you know, in a safe place and I saw so many walls being torn down in those first weeks, you know, things that trade secrets or sort of clandestine information or, you know, secret tips that people kind of kept more to themselves, people were now sharing. So I'm very grateful for that moment, because I think it has really transformed us, or, you know, helped refreshen, you know, like a sense of community that we're in. But in terms of online viewing rooms, Kaufman Repetto is run by two sisters, Francesca Kaufman and Chiara Repetto. The gallery just celebrated its 20th anniversary at the beginning of 2020. You know, they've been running the gallery for a long time. We have very close relationships with the artists. And I think right out at the beginning, it was most important for us to sort of sit for a moment, watch, wait, and then react. So we didn't launch our first online viewing room until May. And that was after conversations with all of the artists, long Zooms, talking with everyone about what are the artists' needs, how do the artists think about these viewing rooms, how are the artists doing first and foremost, and then trying to think about what can the online viewing room do that an exhibition can't, and then to really focus on that. So it was important to us that the online viewing rooms were creating an opportunity that was not a substitution for having a show at the gallery, but creating a new space that we haven't been able to explore. So we launched a series of what we called conversations with the artists, and we would focus on a particular medium or a particular body of work and basically record like a long form interview with the artist, and then either transcribe it or include it as a video in the online viewing room, so that the viewers could go, you know, behind the scenes. And a lot of times we got some really great, I think I'm so proud of the first one that we did with Pay White, because there's just so much material on that online viewing room. And Pay was so generous in sharing sort of in process images, which I think is something that some artists prefer to keep, you know, behind the curtains. And sometimes going, you know, being able to peel back that curtain is really, really exciting for our audience.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think there's something very interesting also, you know, and I may just be speculating here, Amanda, but, you know, you guys are based in New York, but you're also based in Italy. And so you were contending with the needs of very different audiences, probably the needs of very different collectorships. So I do think sometimes that opportunity to just sit down and take pause and think about how to be additive versus, you know, as I said earlier, just reactive, I think is a very wise move. So I'm very appreciative of hearing that you guys were, you know, thoughtful in how to create an interesting new platform that wasn't just kind of either a substitute for, or just, you know, a kind of a redundancy to the exhibitions in person. That seems very cool.
I will say we plan to continue the online viewing rooms. We find that they continue, you know, I think now that the gallery's been open again since September, we've been very lucky in New York. But I've noticed that, you know, some people have stopped doing the online viewing rooms. They're an enormous amount of work. I think they look very simple, but, you know, they're quite complicated to produce. But when there is an exhibition that necessitates more material or archival material or more context, we are planning to do online viewing rooms that sort of supplement the in-person exhibition. So that's very wise. The exhibition that we just had with Curator Kent was in Milan, and it was a retrospective exhibition, but there's so much archival material that helps provide the context for when she was making the work, which was in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and also the political events that it coincided with. So that was something we didn't have room to do in the exhibition that we could do in the online viewing room.
That's very cool. We'll definitely stay tuned for forthcoming viewing rooms then. Amanda, we love to round out with some professional practice questions. It's a fun way to kind of conclude our Frank Fridays. So I am curious if you have any kind of best practices or different words of wisdom that you would offer the next generation of arts professional.
I know that I should have a knee-jerk reaction to this question. To be honest, my particular trajectory in New York and in the art world has been on one, in one sense, complete unique in my own journey. But in the other sense, something that, everyone experiences, or,
Sure.
many hundreds or many thousands of other young women also experience. I also think that there are words of advice that were given to me when I was very young that I wish I hadn't taken so seriously.
Okay.
So my advice to, younger professionals who are getting started in this field, or anyone who's looking for advice, is to take the advice, but take it with a grain of salt and go with your gut.
Yep. I think going with your gut is always a fundamental advice. So I appreciate that.
I think another just absolute crucial advice, especially for someone who might be just getting started in the art industry, is to see as much art as you can, to read as much as you can, to enrich in your visual vocabulary. You really cannot see too much art.
Yeah.
And depending on if you're in New York City, you've got, or wherever you are, but New York, I mean, it's like we have more museums than you could visit. So you don't have any excuse not to see the shows.
All right. So all the watchers of this, get out there and go see some art. Everything is back open. Amanda, our kind of concluding question is always, what is one positive takeaway from the past year that you hope we apply as we, kind of continue to tread along in our trajectory here?
I think there's been a renewal in human connection. I've really embraced the Zoom. I've really embraced getting back on the phone again. I think there's been so much screen fatigue that people have sort of cooled off on writing so many emails just to get the emails out, and instead take a second to think about, who do you want to communicate? Why are you communicating with them? And wouldn't a phone call be nice? And so I feel like my personal relationships, my one-on-one relationships, I've had so much more time for that. I think also appreciating on a very personal note, really appreciating the art that I live with. And as someone, who is selling art, it's really invigorated the inspiration for what I do on a daily basis. I take a great deal of pride introducing people to artwork and helping them find works for their personal collection. We're so lucky to, when you live in a place with museums, to be able to have, these museum collections, but having something that you love, that you live with, and you see every day at whichever scale works for you. I've become enormously grateful for that. And I've actually bought a few pieces during the pandemic, and I love them every day. And it helps. I feel like it's also good karma, because it also helps me feel much more joyful when I'm helping other people find those pieces for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. As someone who also made some pandemic purchases and finds a lot of joy in them every day, I advocate for investing.
See them behind you. Yeah.
Well, I've amassed over the years. There's a beautiful one sitting in front of me that just brings me a lot of joy and inspiration when I'm sitting at my desk every day. But I just think, we're in it to support the ecosystem, and the ecosystem is nothing if not the artists. And so I think remembering that you're also supporting a critical resource, which is, the creative mind, is also something that's very important. So I appreciate those kind of parting words.
Yeah.
Amanda, this has been lovely. I really enjoyed chatting with you. We appreciate that you took the time today. And it's been really nice to speak with you.